you said that once they stay on this whole all three for a while, and then they can go down to the probiotic as maintenance about 2 or 3 times a week.
Yes.
So is that, so you don't need to do it every day as maintenance?
No.
Then
yeah, and the reason is because they are transient organisms and they stay in the gut for 24 days. So once you've healed the gut and you've got the commensals, the keystone strains built up, then it's a matter of just keeping them in the area enough to maintain everything. It's also an advantage to have them in the microbiome in case you're challenged with an exposure. For some people, if it's a food sensitivity that had developed, or a vaccine, an antibiotic, a dose of Roundup, you name it, it's better, it's easier to bring back someone from having some in their gut than starting from scratch.
so that's the two pills each time, 3 times a week?
Yes, 2 to 3 times a week. So it's PRN. If someone can maintain with two times a week, some may need to maintain with 2 capsules 3 times a week. But generally, they figure out how much they need to feel optimal.
Okay. And then also, so one of the supplements is a prebiotic. So wouldn't just eating a whole foods diet of fruits and vegetables, seeds, and whole grains enough to feed the gut, the microbiome?
If you could get enough of those critical oligosaccharides to make a difference, and where these are from indigestible fibers that typically humans don't consume, such as a corn cob or kiwi skins. Those type of fibers have been found to help specifically those keystone strains. But if you could, just grind up kiwi skins and, the centers of corn cobs and some of those type of fibers, I think theoretically you could accomplish the same thing. It's just not as convenient. If you're looking at trying to help the masses, perhaps just diluting this in water and sipping on it through the day would be easier, than making a smoothie of something that would taste pretty nasty.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. And so I used to take Megaspore biotics. I started taking them years ago, and then I haven't taken them in a while, a long time. Mm-hmm. So, and that was before out, I guess, with the prebiotic and the mucosal one. So I'm assuming that I could have gotten much better had I taken all 3. Mm-hmm. Because it did make a difference, but it's really hard to know if I could have gotten better.
Right. And
I think like complete, but it's hard to know.
Yes, and this is part of the difficulty, even with some of the stool testing. It's difficult to really ascertain the condition of someone's gut. And what we're finding is that for a lot of our docs, they'll say that Megaspore is the poor man's stool test, because they can clearly see that when it kicks up a lot of lipopolysaccharide and they get constipated, then they know lipopolysaccharide can shut down the bowels. And then if they see that there's diarrhea, we know that lipopolysaccharide irritates unprotected epithelial cells and will cause diarrhea. So that gives them a good idea of what they're dealing with. When someone doesn't get a response, many times it's because there's a overgrowth of candida that is they don't know about. And the reason is because there's a thick mucus layer on top of the mucin layers, and it prevents a lot of these components to get to the active sites of, mucin 1 and mucin 2. So we're learning a lot as we have put this program together, and how people are responding, and also the technology of testing is getting better. And we are looking into launching a genetic stool test that will have a higher technology and be able to track the progress of these products without so much of the guessing. You look like you have a question, Ashley.
Okay. I guess so.
I do. I have a few. I was just going to let Nancy, go through hers first, but
Okay.
I do have a few questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Until we're ready.
Okay, Nance, go ahead.
Okay. And then the Hashimoto's studies, I don't know if there's been a lot with that, but I don't know if there are people that have started taking all three of the supplements and found that they don't need to be on their thyroid medication anymore. I don't know if there's any studies with that. I'd like to know.
Yeah, the study is in progress, because that was one of the key things when we launched Megaspore that we saw a lot of resolution of, and that was all of the autoimmune diseases. Reduction of TPO, reducing the inflammation, and it proves that when you can heal the gut, you can greatly affect autoimmune conditions. So that is back to that genesis of autoimmune disease that's related to the integrity of the gut. So in theory, we knew that it was possible. Then we started seeing it happen with Megaspore. So now it's in a clinical trial, so we'll have the scientific data to back it up.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're free to ask your questions.
Okay, let's see here.
I probably have more, but go ahead.
Okay, first question was, so because of the oligosaccharides, I'm assuming that the Mega Prebiotic would be contraindicated with like SIBO or somebody who's on a FODMAPs diet?
Good question, but no, we've got a lot of docs using the prebiotic with SIBO because it's specific for the keystone strains. But here's the key. You want to introduce Megaspore first, because Megaspore helps reestablish the pH barriers of the gut. And these organisms they have translocated into the wrong section of the gut because the pH barriers have been broken down. So if you reestablish that reconditioning, you're improving that barrier, and it's sending those large bowel organisms back down where they belong. So that's important to get that reconditioning step going, and then jumpstart those keystone strains with the prebiotic to keep the barriers in place.
How do you feel about the FODMAP diet? I know that's kind of outside of the box here, but
since I'm not familiar with it, can you tell me kind of the essence of how it works?
Oh, it's a horrible diet that
Yes.
we have to coach people through. So, but when you're looking at treating SIBO, it's the diet that's been the most studied, and it's taking out your fermentable oligosaccharides. And so it's taking out a lot of, fibrous foods. We talk a lot about how, the sort of the perfect firestorm for SIBO is a chronically stressed person, and which is, pretty much all of us, combined with, somebody who's actually trying to make good choices and eating a lot of highly fibrous foods, that would be high in those oligosaccharides. So that's pretty much it, but it's tough as a health coach because you're taking out foods that you would normally recommend your patients to eat. So
Right.
Anyway, that's the reason why it made me think of the prebiotic and being an oligosaccharide.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I would say from what you said, it goes against some of the principles of what Kiran Krishnan, our microbiologist, is promoting. And that is that to maintain gut diversity, you have to have a widely diverse diet. If you put people on too strict of a diet, you're actually cutting down on the diversity of their microbiome. And that fermented foods have very critical metabolites. They're not delivering live organisms because those are going to die in the stomach. Our stomach is designed to kill bacteria and they will die, but they do have a metabolic responding function. It's limited and it only happens when you're consuming them, but it still is helpful. So I would say that the diet, I don't know if there's research to support that by severely limiting their diet, it may be cutting down on all the organisms in the gut, but long term, that's not what you want to do. You want to put a general in the environment to direct traffic, to send them down the small bowel, the large organisms that are in the small bowel, back where they belong, recondition the gut for long-term health and longevity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, the SIBO protocol is 6 weeks. I mean, it's not a long-term, you know, if we were doing a FODMAPs diet, we absolutely would not recommend it be a long-term diet, but
okay.
Anyway, that's okay. The other thing I was going to ask is the mucosal product that had the amino acids in it. What are your thoughts on L-glutamine? I was surprised to not see that in there.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
L-glutamine feeds the villi. It's the food of the villi. What we're trying to restore is that mucin layer. And so, and we found that the L-glutamine is, again, it's a food for the villi, which is important, but you're going to get a lot of that in your diet. But it's the mucin layer that's going to protect the microvilli. So that really has to be established first.
Okay. Is there a test for LPS?
Yes, there is. I believe most of it's still in research. I don't know if it's commercially available. There might be some functional medicine labs that are looking at it or may have it, but I know it's not as widely commercially available as what we would like.
It's not going to be a part, like you mentioned, the stool test that you guys are going to be coming out with. I guess it was a stool test, but you said something about a genetic stool test?
Yes, from what I understand, the stool tests right now are not as advanced as what, especially in the bacterial populations. The analyte side of it is fine. The calprotectin, the IgA, the cytokines, the interleukin, those tests are fine for establishing how much inflammation and some of the clues about the health of the gut. But because the bacterial populations are not well established and they're so unique and individual to the person, it's never made sense. And for what is a commensal for some people is not for the others. So until we can get a good genetic test to determine for the specific individual, then we won't launch the test. So we're looking at it. I hope within the next year we'll be there. But for right now, it's still looking at symptomology in determining which of the products and what combination of the products.
Are the products that we're talking about today eligible for private labeling?
They are. I would say this is a young company. They haven't perfected their private label department, and it's a little unrefined at this point. So we have, to my knowledge, we haven't private labeled the Prebiotic and the Megamucosa and the IgA, even though it's available. We have provided custom products in the Megaspore where 3 of the organisms can be added to your own blend and private labeled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, I was a little bit familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned butyrate as one of the most important short chain fatty acids. Do you have a product, possibly a new product, that's coming out
I feel a setup.
in regards to butyrate?
Yes,
I wasn't fed that question at all.
We did receive information at the recent sales meeting that there is an anaerobic probiotic organism that we are preparing to launch in about 2 months, and it is a high butyrate producer. This is we'll be watching the area of how much more it can reduce inflammation for bowel inflammatory disease, weight loss, and the C word. Those are going to be the areas that we're looking at.
Okay.
And I think where we've seen Megaspore, we've seen 80% of the individuals respond very well to Megaspore. There's a 20% population that seems to be very hypersensitive, what we would call our canaries. They have, in some cases, they can open the capsule, they can use a half a cap every other day and then ramp up. And then half of those, they can't do that. They'll try a fourth, they'll even try a pinch. So what it says is that, these folks have such severe gut damage. And what we believe is that those keystone strains are really in jeopardy. They either have such a low amount of them or they're damaged. And the most important of those keystone strains are those that can produce butyrate. So that's why we feel the introduction of this anaerobe, which has never been launched before. There's never been a probiotic, but it's a new technology of a nitrogen-filled capsule to keep it in an anaerobic environment that will get it to the gut, and then when it colonizes, be able to get that important butyrate population up, which we believe is the key that's missing in the most serious of the gut issues.
Okay.
The other new product.
I had another question and I just forgot it.
Well, while you're thinking, the other new product that we think will launch before that other mystery product is called MegaGuard, and it's going to be for the upper intestinal tract, for the H. pylori, the dyspepsia, the whole stomach-related conditions. So we think that we'll see that one before the butyrate product.
What's in that one?
It's a German study was launched that show there's a particular combination of licorice, artichoke root, and ginger that is amazing.
Okay. Is that deglycerized licorice?
No, it's not. So, and I've heard this before in other formulations that it's much like the Nicene. If the deglycerized, even though you're helping those who might be trending toward high blood pressure, you're removing some of the key ingredients that are important to help with dyspepsia and H. pylori.
Okay. Dang it, I can't remember.
You might have been thinking about the Microbalance product. That's the AntiCandida product.
That's a good, it wasn't that, but like I would like to know more about that. So that's great.
Well, the key thing is, like with all the products, do not start at the recommended dose. The ingredients are undecalinic acid and B-propolis, We know that they are specific for stopping the hypha attachment of Candida albicans to the epithelial cells. It also reduces the cell division and stops the biofilms. So it is very specific to yeast, which we like because we have found that a lot of the antimicrobials and biofilm busters disrupt the entire microbiome and hurt the commensals. So our approach is to go to a kinder, gentler, very specific target. And so it works very well, but it's very strong. The recommended dose is 5 gel caps 3 times a day. My recommendation after we've launched it is with women, especially with women that have had previous yeast infections, start with 1 gel cap one day and then progress to 2 the next day and then 3 and so on. And I would also recommend add the IgG 2000, 1 cap to 1 cap, because we have found it will cause the revisit of wherever they've had a Candida. Candida excretes an exotoxin that goes deep into the tissue. And again, when you introduce undeclinic acid, it stirs it up. It doesn't want to leave, and a battle starts. So wherever they've had the Candida, they'll have the itching in the scalp, or they'll see the hives on their skin. It will be tolerable, but that's the way to keep it tolerable, is to go extremely slow. I will tell you, when they don't and they go too fast, Candida affects the nervous system, and what you'll get is an agitated, crying, irritable woman. And to avoid that, go slow.
Hey, you triggered my memory. I remembered what it was I was going to ask you.
Good.
So you were talking about how we've got some canaries with Megaspore Biotic who can just be very symptomatic. Can you talk a little bit more about that symptomatology might look like?
Yes. Again, the obvious ones is the overproduction of lipopolysaccharide in constipation, the damaged gut, irritability from the lipopolysaccharide in diarrhea, but the other spectrum is the gas, bloating, cramps, foggy thinking, and just anything you would generally relate symptomology to the gut. And some of them, again, it's resolved with just dividing the dose. But there have been some that it doesn't matter how much you divide the dose, they can't even tolerate a pinch. So what you can do is start them on the 2-spore formula, which is RestoreFlor. It has some Saccharomyces boulardii. It's much more tolerable for the hypersensitive individual, and then just tell them they will graduate up to Megaspore as soon as their gut is ready. So titrate up the RestoreFlor, put them back on the Megaspore, and generally they're fine. There's also a 1-spore product that's called HU58. And if by any chance they can't tolerate the RestoreFlor, I haven't found anyone that could, but there is the opportunity to go from 1 spore to 2 spore to 5 spores. Now, I will tell you, those 2 products were created for other conditions, and that the HU58 was a special request from Cleveland Clinic, who has a ward of hepatic encephalopathy. And they wanted to try just 1 spore at a time. But it was so successful, reducing the ammonia and the infectious disorder, that is their standard of care. And they just have attached themselves to that product, and that's what they use. So in certain cases, we have had you add the HU58 to the Megaspore when a person doesn't have time to titrate and they are in a critical situation in the hospital or 1 step into the hospital. So it's been very effective at turning around hepatic encephalopathy, C. diff, and again, emergency level infectious disorders. The RestoreFlor was created for a demand of people who They didn't know how they were going to respond on the Megaspore, but they were either on an antibiotic, going to be on an antibiotic, or recovering from an antibiotic. So that's where it, was very helpful in the market. But again, it's also helpful if someone can't tolerate Megaspore.
Okay, good to know. And then if we're private labeling anyway, it can only be 3 spores. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And then we can, I assume there are some spores that are not eligible for that private label. So we sort of have maybe a few others that we can choose from. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. As I'm going back to the doctor, that I work for, and kind of parlaying all this information to him, he is going to just want to see any study material or research material that you have, as far as, if we're talking about a Candida product, for example. He's going to want to see, okay, well, what research has been done on this product? What, how can we see before and afters, and just see very clearly the effect it has on Candida growth in the gut? If you have any information like that, I think that would be really helpful.
Yes, and with the undecanoic acid, there's specific studies on it. But no, at one point we were looking at individual conditions, but that's why we went to the metabolic endotoxemia study, because it's the foundation for all of the chronic illnesses, whether it's C. diff, autoimmune disease, chronic bowel disorders, you name it. If there's a connection to the gut, the most important thing you can do is resolve the leaky gut, and that will affect the underlying inflammation and the exasperation of every chronic illness. So that's the best investment that we could make to affect all of those conditions. But we do have 12 clinical trials because certain universities and different medical centers wanted specific studies. So we just finished a study in California from a very large dermatology institution, and it's under review right now. The results were that it decreased acne by 50%. Acne is a disease. It's an infection, and that's a huge finding. So there are other studies going on that you will see will come out with specific disorders, looking at other microbiomes. All other microbiomes are connected to the gut. So, different institutions that have a specialty, they're going to want to see that specific resolution. So those will be coming out.
Okay.
An exciting study that also is still under review, but it was the gut model studies. That is how we know so much about our product. And we challenge all other probiotic companies, do a gut model study so you know how it gets through the gastric barrier, what it produces, how it gets along with all the other organisms, and how it improves the gut. But what was important for us to find out was, first of all, no one had ever studied what is the effect of Roundup and glyphosate specifically on a microbiome. So we did 3 simultaneous gut model studies, and this is using a pristine microbiome from a 3-year-old, never exposed to vaccinations, and a perfect diet. So, some anomaly in Norway, where you can live like that. And they used her microbiome, inoculated these gut models, and one was the placebo, one was with glyphosate, and one was with Roundup. And what the evidence has shown so far is that Roundup is several times more toxic than glyphosate by itself because of the surfactants and the inerts. And after 3 weeks, the condition of the gut looks like colorectal cancer. And these are using levels that the EPA have deemed as safe, ingestible levels of Roundup. So this is a critical and serious finding. The next most important thing was, now what can the spores do to help? So what they've found so far is that after 3 weeks of the spore inoculation, first of all, the trend toward all of those analytes going toward a cancerous looking sick microbiome are stopped, and then the trend is going in the other direction to heal it. The study's not complete. They've seen dramatic drops in the ammonia of the lipopolysaccharide, so it's looking very good. But that will be a land-breaking or groundbreaking study when it's published, because no one has ever looked at the devastation of that herbicide or had any, documented reversal of it.
Okay. And I'm sorry, did you say when you were expecting that to come out? Because that would be fascinating to read.
I don't have any ETA on that. Those
Okay.
updates are coming monthly. I'll get you in the loop on that. We have an internal science forum, so any questions that are specific, I can get you the latest and greatest.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We haven't talked about vitamin K, but we can just do a little tickler for maybe another webinar that we can cover the important effects of how the menaquinone helps dissolve the calcium plaques and in soft tissue that will affect atherosclerosis, kidney stones, gallbladder stones, lower blood pressure, and so forth. So we'll find another time to go over all of that. And I think I saw Nancy's hand up here. We'll try to get that in before they cut me off again. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, real quick. Yeah, so if you haven't been on Megaspore Biotics for a long time, like 6 months or more, should you do the titration from the beginning like you would if you have as a beginner?
Yes, I would. I would believe that the titration would go faster. So as long as you're not experiencing any of those GI symptoms, you could condense it and shorten the titration, but I would start slow just in case.
Okay, and then if I'm adding the other two for the first time, and do I follow that schedule?
Yes.
Or can I just start taking all now at the same time?
Start with one of the powders, a half a scoop for the first week, and then a full scoop for the next week, and then add the second powder, same thing, half a scoop for the first week, and then a full scoop. If someone struggled with Megaspore, I would add that Megamucosa first. And if they really struggled, I would even pre-treat the gut with the Megamucosa just to get some of that mucin layer healing, which is generally that lipopolysaccharide irritation that Megaspore kicks up a lot of. So you can pre-treat or you can just add it first.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. I will post this on a YouTube and give you the link. So if there's anything you wanted to review, but certainly I would love to meet with you again and we can cover some more when the new products come out and with the vitamin K product. There's a lot more to go over.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you,
You're
Tracy.
welcome. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You too.